Welcome to the Tenkara Angler Rod Report. Today we're going to look at the Tenkara USA Satoki. All right, let's take a look at the Tenkara USA Satoki, which I believe is Tenkara USA's first new rod since the release of the Hane in 2018. The best way to describe the Satoki is that it is the next in the line of Tenkara USA's popular three-way zoom rod models. The smallest being the Roto, which is their small stream rod. They also have the Sato, which is kind of their all-purpose three-way zoom rod. And now they have the Satoki, which is intended for slightly larger waters and bigger fish. As far as the name Satoki, I actually had to do a Google search to kind of figure out what that translates into in English, and I found a lot of different things. I found words like wise or clever. I even found tree or broom. So we asked the Tenkara USA team why they named it Satoki, and the reason is actually a little bit more simple. It's the combination of two of the more popular products in their product line. It's the combination of the Sato rod, which I already mentioned, and the Oki Kabari, which is one of their larger fly patterns. So when you kind of smush them together, Sato plus Oki, you get Satoki. So what do you get when you buy a Satoki? Well, we'll start with the tube and sock. The Satoki will come in this standard Tenkara USA hard tube. This tube also had a little banding on it with a little instructional, manual or packet for those that have never fished Tenkara before. It gives you kind of a little bit of a startup guide on how to do so. It also comes with this red stretchy sock that I know a lot of people like to use. Those that even don't like to use the tube when they bring their rods on the trail, a lot of them still like to put them in these stretchy socks. And of course, the Satoki itself. And the first thing that I noticed when I took the Satoki out of the tube was its cosmetics. The Satoki looks quite a bit different than a lot of the other Tenkara USA rods. And what I mean by that is most of the other Tenkara USA rods, like this Roto here, are just a glossy black painted finish. The Satoki, on the other hand, actually has exposed carbon fiber. It's still glossy, it's still shiny, but you can see the carbon fiber weave up and down the blank of the Satoki, and it's really quite attractive. You see that on some higher end Japanese rods from time to time, but you don't see it very often from U.S. Rod makers. So it was nice to see that in the Satoki. Also, when you hold it up to the light, you probably won't be able to see it too well on this camera, but there's a tint of red all throughout the paint job, or the gloss job, I guess, maybe what I'd call it, in the Satoki. It matches some of the hardware, which I'll get into in a minute, but it's really quite stunning. Make sure that I put a picture up on the screen so you can see what the Satoki looks like outside in the sun. All right, looking at some of the characteristics of the Satoki, we'll start at the bottom and move our way to the top. The Satoki has a plastic or nylon cap at the end that screws in and out. That cap also has a hole in it, which allows you to store an extra end cap in it. So I'll kind of put that back in there. It's knurled like a coin, so you can unscrew it relatively easy if you need to disassemble the rod. The grip or the handle section is a dense, primarily black foam handle. It does have some gray accents, which have etchings of a Kabari and the Tenkara USA logo. Cosmetically, it's actually very similar to the Hane's handle, just the inverse colors. This one's primarily black, as you can see, whereas the Hane's is primarily gray. If you can make it out, the winding check and all the metal, even the part of the rod that the end cap screws into, all the metal on the rod is red anodized, which does match that tint that I mentioned earlier in this video on the blank of the rod. So overall, while it doesn't scream that this is a red rod, there's definitely a lot of accents of red on this rod. Carbon fiber looking blank, which is really cool. Very clean Satoki and if I flip it around, Tenkara USA logos on the rod. And then the various length notations are at the tips of the 3 zoom sections, biggest being 13.7 feet or 415 centimeters, the middle being 370 centimeters or 12.2 feet, and then the shortest length being 325 centimeters or 10.8 feet long. To end the rod, there is a tip cap, which is very standard in Tenkara USA rods, where it's that wooden top with a rubber, kind of insert, and then a length of Lillian stringed onto the end. As I mentioned, this rod does come with 2 of these, one at the tip, and then one that you can insert in the tail as a spare. And then I guess speaking of the Lillian, I should probably call this out as well. The Tenkara USA Satoki does have a standard red Lillian that does come pre-knotted from the factory. I know some of you like knots in your Lillian, some of you don't. This one does have it, so if you don't, you'll just have to find a way to pick that out if you want to fully disassemble your rod for cleaning and drying. Now we'll get into some of the measurables and characteristics of the Satoki. The Satoki is a 9-sectioned Tenkara rod. And as I mentioned, it has 3 fishable lengths, 325 centimeters, 370 centimeters, and 415 centimeters. When the rod is nested with the tip cap in, it's 22.4 inches long. And that foam handle that I mentioned earlier in the video is 11.8 inches long as well. So just under a ruler's length of length in the grip section. The circumference of the grip is very similar to other Tenkara USA rods. So if you like the way those feel, you'll feel familiar with the Satoki. It's 3.1 inches in circumference, and the handle does have 2 slight humps to it, which makes it easy to handle from the end as well as the upper section. If you're familiar with other Tenkara USA rods, you'll really like the way this one feels in your hand. With the cap removed, the Satoki weighs 3.4 ounces or 96 grams, which kind of makes it an average weight for a rod in the, call it 13.5 to 14 foot class. Not super heavy, not super light, kind of in the middle. In terms of all the measurements that indicate the rod's flex and strength, first let's touch on the penny scores, the common sense ratings. The Satoki actually has a very similar penny rating across all 3 of its lengths. At its shortest length, it scores 24 pennies, and then at its medium and longest length, it both scores 25 pennies. So basically, what that means is as you extend the rod out, it will get gradually softer. As a matter of fact, when you look at the rod flex index, at its shortest length, it scores a 7.4. At its middle length, it scores a 6.8. And at its longest length, it rates a 6.0, making the first 2 sections, the short and the middle, what I call a fast or tip flex rod, kind of your 7.3. And then your longest length, more of a moderate or mid flex rod, your 6.4. One other measurement I'd like to note is that the Satoki has a rotational moment of 8.1 at its longest length. Tom Davis likes to categorize rods in the 400 centimeter or longer class by using rotational moment to give an indication of how tip heavy the rod might feel. He says that rods start to feel tip heavy at a rotational moment of 6.0, and as they move larger than that number, the rod feels proportionately more heavy. As I mentioned, the Satoki has an 8.1, so do with that measurement as you feel. Getting into the performance of the Satoki, I did have the opportunity to fish the Satoki a couple times, most notably over a long weekend of fishing in the Tennessee mountains. We were actually fishing some delayed harvest stocked rainbow water, and I thought the Satoki would be an ideal rod to try in those waters, just in the off chance that I get into a big rainbow and really test the intent of this rod for bigger waters and larger fish. Unfortunately, I didn't get into that big elusive rainbow, but I did catch a bunch of fish ranging anywhere from, some wild fish down at, the 6 to 8 inch range, all the way up to some of those stocked fish up to 14 to 16 inches. And it's kind of interesting. The Satoki handled them all relatively well. There was plenty of muscle in this rod to handle them. But I would say, it wasn't necessarily, unfun to fish some of those smaller fish that I caught. Those smaller rainbows, they did put up a fight on this rod. It did feel fun. It did flex. And it was generally a pleasurable casting and fishing experience with the Satoki. I'd note the two shorter lengths are a bit crisp. They're way crisper than the longest length. When the rod is fully extended, it's a very different rod than the shorter lengths. It's much softer, much slower. Might be my bias. I prefer shorter rods usually when I fish, rods that are 11 foot or 12 foot. So, when I fished Satoki at 13.6, just felt a little heavy and a little soft to me. But for those of you who like some of those big overbuilt rods, it might feel light to you. It's just all a point of reference and what you like when you go fishing. Luckily, Jason and Anthony also got to fish Satoki, and they gave us some feedback, which we've posted in our Satoki Rod Report article on tenkaraangler.com. We'll put the link to that article in this video's description so you can check out what they have to think about the Satoki as well. I did want to note that since this rod is brand new and we actually got an advanced copy, I don't know what the MSRP of the rod is going to be. I would imagine that it would retail in the $250 range, similar to the Roto and Sato, maybe a little bit more. But once Tenkara USA does put it up for sale, which should be around when this video goes live, we'll make sure to put a link to that as well in this video's description so you can find the rod relatively easily. In closing, thanks for joining us today for this Tenkara Angler Rod Report. If you enjoy these rod reports, we'd really appreciate it if you would like, subscribe, and click that little notification bell, just to show us that you're enjoying what we're doing and motivate us to make more of these videos. Until next time, tight lines and good fishing. Talk to you soon.